Wonderful. It is a treat to have this conversation, even though I've been given some predictably tough acts to follow. So I want to speak mostly about the United States, to which the premise of our panel applies well. The United States sure seems to be in the midst of a transition to a different kind of global role for itself. The destination remains uncertain and unpredictable, but it does seem likely to be less tethered to the institutions, patterns, and even ideas and ideologies established in the wake of the Second World War. That said, I want to focus my remarks by posing the question of what we might miss in the case of the United States, in particular, when we take the post-war order as the touchstone from which to interpret the present and assess the stakes of the current moment. Many of the changes underway seem to me to stem first and foremost from the post-Cold War international order, from the trajectories set by it and the reactions to it. And much of the uncertainty today in Washington derives from, I think, the US decision after 1989 to pursue global political military primacy in a unipolar world, absent great power rivals of the kind the United States and its allies confronted in World War II and then in the Cold War. After all, if President Trump is the central protagonist in the American part of this drama, it's worth noting that he and his advisors often present themselves as revising mistakes of post-Cold War policymaking, not as seeking to alter post-1945 arrangements. One widely understood Trump narrative is about post-Cold War globalization and the dislocations caused by trade and migration. Another story is about grand strategic overreach from the project of liberal world ordering. The United States, in this view, erred by attempting nation-building wars to liberalize Iraq and Afghanistan, and then naively facilitated China's rise in the expectation that it too would liberalize and or become a pro-American actor on the world stage. For Pentagon officials like Elbridge Colby, for example, World War II and the Cold War were fine things. And the trouble came when the United States mucked around in the Middle East and allowed China to rise to become a peer competitor with the United States in the Western Pacific and beyond. Now, of course, one shouldn't take at face value the stories Trump and company tell about what they're doing. But I think there is good reason to take seriously a post-Cold War rather than post-World War framing of the current upheaval in U.S. foreign policy, even if one might not take the Trumpian version of that post-Cold War narrative. So to stay with political economy, the post-1945 order was famously designed to achieve, as John Ruggie put it, embedded liberalism, that is to privilege national employment and welfare above the burdens of international economic adjustment while still enjoying gains from trade. But over time, the economic order shifted toward neoliberalism long before Trump came down his escalator. And it was designed less to protect national social welfare than to liberalize trade and even national regulations, as embodied in the WTO, after all, a creation of the 1990s. So I think it would be too simple to say that Trump is out to undo the post-World War II economic order. It's possible that the oft-invoked 1930s scenario of beggar thy neighbor policies will return. But some on the new right today could be interpreted as grasping at a restoration of some kind of embedded liberalism with national manufacturing, nationally bounded businesses, reshored supply chains, perhaps not the part of expanding social welfarism. Still, other parts of the administration, including Trump himself, more recently have harked back to the 19th century when tariffs raised most government revenue and protected industry. But turning to US security policy, I think that viewing current events through the lens of 1945 risks assuming that the United States had been dutifully carrying on the post-war legacy until the Trumpian rupture. of the past decade. There's a reason why no less a Cold Warrior than the Reaganite neoconservative Jeane Kirkpatrick wrote in 1990 that the United States should wind down most of its overseas security alliances and military garrisons and become, as she titled her essay, a normal country in a normal time. To her, the United States had mobilized global power to counter specific threats, that of totalitarian great powers with manifest expansionist ambitions. Once those powers went away, in her view, it only made sense that the United States should retract its power projection and wait to see if comparable threats ever arose. She anticipated that if instead the United States pursued global primacy in the absence of such threats, it would turn its preeminence into an endless project of world order management, which she feared would drift away from any tethering in American interests and ultimately be rejected by the American public. And I think it's worth, asking whether she foresaw some of the dilemmas the United States is facing now. Although she did underestimate quite the ambition of the post-Cold War United States insofar as subsequent administrations not only retained but also expanded American security alliances and objectives. They did so, of course, often in the name of upholding the post-World War II tradition. But in a sense, they adopted a different, more forward-leaning principle from the one the United States actually employed in World War II and the Cold War. An important planning document from the Pentagon in 1992 kind of makes this point implicitly. It argues that the United States had been too slow to grasp the dangers of the 1940s, first of the Axis powers, then of Soviet-backed communism. And that almost led to disaster. And so instead of following in the footsteps of old, the United States should sustain its alliances and forward military presence all the time, regardless of circumstances, rather than demobilize and then be prepared to remobilize according to threats. In effect, the United States had to maintain overwhelming military power because it couldn't trust itself to pull back. It might enjoy that too much and become complacent. My gloss, of course, not that of Dick Cheney's Pentagon at the time. So 35 years later, here we are. NATO and Russia are confronting each other in Ukraine, a former Soviet republic that no American in the 1950s could have believed was vital to the security of the United States. How do we get here? Less because the United States kept upholding the post-45 order than because it pursued unipolar dominance, which has led NATO to double in size in terms of its member states from its Cold War membership as of the end of 1990. NATO itself morphed from an organization centered on deterrence and defense to a continually expanding political military club. And the United States pledged to defend new members, it's true, but less because it was willing to fight for them than because it believed that by pledging to fight for them, by bringing them into NATO, no attack would occur and no defense would become necessary. So if you look back to read the Senate debate over the 2004 round of enlargement, when, among others, the three small Baltic states, also former Soviet republics, were admitted, the Senate unanimously approved that round, but scarcely debated it. And this suggests to me a consensus that was wide, at least among the political class, but not deep. As a result, I think you would say much the same thing about the consensus around the larger pursuit of primacy in the United States. So the United States today isn't so much walking away from an 80-year-old tradition as it is grappling for the first time with just how much it wishes to do for its recently acquired allies in Eastern Europe in the face of a Russian conventional military threat that's real and persistent, but nothing like the scale of the threat to dominate Europe that the Soviet Union posed. And turning to Asia, today again, the United States is grappling with a specifically post-Cold War phenomenon, the rise of China in the shadow of a post-Cold War policy of the United States known as the engagement strategy. Under that strategy, China was supposed to focus on economic growth without challenging the military primacy of the United States in Asia. Secondly, China was supposed to liberalize, especially economically, and become a responsible stakeholder or junior partner to the United States in managing global problems. China, in the event, has had other ideas to be a great power with its own set of interests, weary of America's security role in its own region and of America's pressure to see it change. The example of FDR, however, might have suggested a different course of action. As Professor Manella has written, FDR foresaw China's rise, admitted it into the Security Council as a permanent member. So perhaps, arguably, plausibly, he might have counseled more of a coexistence approach from the start with less emphasis on liberalizing China and a more determined effort to work out terms of coexistence with China as a great power. Instead, I would say, to really simplify, the United States has instead attempted engagement with China and more recently shifted to the quasi-containment of China, and it has passed over or relegated to a secondary objective, the option of seeking competitive coexistence with a powerful, great power, China. So to conclude, I think that throughout the post-Cold War period and up to the present, American leaders have sometimes deflected away from the choices they were making in their moment by claiming the mantle of World War II, which remains a touchstone of legitimacy, of course, not just in the United States, but in many other countries in the world, as we've heard in China too. Since Trump's rise, his critics have accused him of weakening the post-war order. He himself, ironically, offers his own appeal to nostalgia, make America great again. And well, it's never quite clear when he thinks America had been great and then things went south. Sometimes he'll reference his own mid-20th century figures like General Patton and General MacArthur. So, I think it's important for the country to be able to face its choices squarely now in a competitive post-unipolar world, at least by reflecting critically on our recent trajectory and without being impeded by a fear of deviating from an orthodoxy supposedly established 80 years ago. In that regard, I think Trump and the Trump right has beaten Democrats and the center to the punch. And here's one way in which Trump is breaking from a post-war tradition. Every president from FDR to Barack Obama invoked the specter of isolationism as something to be avoided, except now Donald Trump. Trump doesn't advocate isolationism. He just doesn't speak of it at all, just as he doesn't speak of the post-45 international order one way or another. That indifference does seem to mark an important break on the level of ideas and ideology. But where the break is leading on the level of strategy and policy remains very much undetermined. Basically, we could imagine two possible trajectories. One of them would be a real break with global military primacy. For example, this administration seems most likely to do so if it does, by withdrawing U.S. conventional forces in some measure from Europe and shifting the primary burden there onto European allies. So far, however, if Trump might seem in principle open to such a course, he certainly hasn't delivered it. He's been the president of the United States for almost 5 years, and he hasn't delivered a retraction of American power from the world, but rather, I think, more what the political scientist Barry Posen calls illiberal hegemony. He has retained all the alliances and most of the indefinite military deployments that he inherited, but he's more coercive and transactional with allies, adversaries, and third countries alike. So I will leave it there and very much look forward to our discussion.
Thank you.